Anywho, what I would encourage you guys to do is something that I tried to get into the habit of when I first got into HTML and CSS. But I try to observe the world around me. So if I'm stuck in traffic and I see a billboard, I try to look at that billboard and try to break it down mentally into maybe HTML elements and the CSS. How is that billboard laid out? Or if I'm looking at a menu at Wendy's, like I was yesterday, I go to Wendy's because I burnt some bridges at McDonald's, unfortunately. It's a touchy subject. But as I look at anything that's laid out, I try to think, how would I have coded that in HTML and CSS? So really quickly, as kind of an exercise, I don't know if you guys can see this super well, but I want you guys just to take a peek at this newspaper and just throw out some, if we were going to translate this into HTML or even CSS, if you see anything CSS-y, just throw out some tags or some elements that you guys are familiar with that may be applicable if we were going to try to code this, kind of the top half of this newspaper up. You can just put it into Slack or you can throw it out. Yeah, so I see, let's see here. Man, this is an old paper. April 14th, 2015. I'm gonna have to check see what Apple was 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, 1.5 years ago. Yeah, lots of boxes. Yeah, definitely some divs. So divs are really good to separate content, right? Yeah, maybe an H1. So maybe this headline right here. How many H1s do we have? Yeah, how many H1s? You guys can put that into Slack. 3, 2, close, 1. Sorry, not necessarily on the page, but generally speaking, in HTML, how many H tags are there? 6, yeah. So H1, there's H1 up to H6. So H1 is the largest, H6 is the smallest. What else do we have here? Yeah, we have an image tag. Yeah, a couple of images for sure. And we probably use CSS to set like the width and height of those images because this one's smaller than that one. Article. Yeah, Audrey, so what would you consider an article tag here?
An article tag can be inside the body where the actual article is going to be held. So yeah, we know that's a big part of what's going to be happening. So if that was if that part on the top you're showing me there,
yeah,
article, that can be an article tag to hold that section.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, article tag, well, we're going to talk a little bit about HTML5 and why we want to be very semantic with our HTML element names. But an article tag inherently it's not really that much different from a plain div, but it's much more descriptive. So if you think about a blog article, you have an article, maybe an aside section. So over here, like maybe we have an aside. Maybe we have like links to other articles, right there. We could also maybe have a nav bar. So a lot of times on newspapers, it has like, oh, in the people section or the sports section, maybe navs, kind of theoretically speaking. Maybe some sort of big kind of banner ad right here. You see that a lot on websites, some sort of huge kind of jumbotron, for those of you that have used Bootstrap, like some attention-grabbing graphic. Yeah, side section, yeah, float. So David, what would you describe as a float on here?
That small image in the first article.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, so a float would be a CSS property that helps us align and lay out our stuff. Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, Deb mentions text flowing around the image. Yeah, so float and kind of the flow of the text would, work hand in hand. Padding, yeah. Matthew, what do you think about padding? Where are you seeing some padding here?
So on the very top near the USA Today, they probably had some padding to move it over to the left side.
Yeah, you kind of see like a little bit of a padding or margin, all around the paper, and then a little bit of spacing between like the sections, right? What do you guys think about this black line that goes all across the page? What might that be in HTML? Can you guys see that? A border, maybe, yeah. Yeah, maybe a border. I was also thinking of maybe there's an HR tag, like a horizontal rule, just to like separate sections. Okay, my arm's getting tired, so I'm gonna have to Feeling the burn on that one. That's really good, you guys. So again, the takeaway is HTML. It's the way that we structure our content. So you can think of HTML. If I'm an architect, I have some blueprints that are my HTML, and the finished building would be our web page. Or maybe I have like a recipe with the instructions and all the ingredients for my recipe, and then that fully baked dish may be my web page. Just for some examples. One more thing I want to show you before we hop into the main thing. Here's a really fun little kind of a bookmarklet, something that you can attach to your bookmarks bar if you wish. But this is another great tool that I like to show, and maybe you guys have seen this before. It's a really great tool to think about a page in more of an HTML kind of a layout type format, even a wireframe, if you will, as this name suggests. So this is called Wirify. Let me share my screen real quick, and I'll show you how this thing works. This is a fun little tool. If you're ever curious, again, that idea that I want you guys to be mindful of just random stuff. Like even if you see like a book cover, what fonts did they use? What colors? What CSS properties? How did they lay it out? And this Wirify tool is a really great tool to kind of visualize that. I'm going to share my screen, so hold tight. So if you want to go to wirify.com, the way this thing works, it's pretty simple. And this is just for funsies. Go ahead and grab or kind of highlight the Wirify by box side area. And then you can drag that right up here to your bookmark bar. And you can delete this if you want later. And so the idea is when you go to a web page, you can click on that bookmarklet and it will transform the page. It parses the HTML and it just turns it into like a fancy wireframe. And I think this is really interesting because if you look through here, you can tell like, okay, we have kind of a nav bar with maybe some list items up here at the top. I think these are images. Here's like a video section. And you can hover over them and it should display what these are individually. So a site like ESPN.com or CNN.com that just has like a whole bunch of stuff going on, sometimes this is a fun tool to use just to check out, to think about the layout. What does the HTML look like? So if I load up CNN, that takes a second because there's so much content between the videos, the images. This thing takes like 10 seconds to load sometimes. But once it finishes, I can click on the bookmarklet. It may take just a second. And this is what CNN.com looks like underneath. So if I was going to wireframe this site, this is what it would look like. So this is what we're talking about this morning. We'll talk about HTML and then some CSS. But maybe this tool will be useful if there's a site that you're interested in. It's kind of cool to see it in this kind of wireframe-ish format. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share and we will hop into HTML. And to get started, what I want to do is put you guys into breakout rooms, and instead of me just barking some of these thoughts and such to you, I'm going to put you guys into breakouts. And here are the 5 questions I want you guys to research. So I want each breakout to go through all 5 questions, but you can see here that I actually, assigned a breakout group to each question. And so when we come back, I'd like you guys to share out kind of your findings for that specific question. So the questions are, what are self-closing tags? And please give me 3 examples. Describe an HTML tag and its components. What are link and script tags used for? What are the 4 tags that a basic HTML page must have? What is accessibility? And provide 2 examples of HTML tags that reflect that concept. So you guys may already know most of these, which is awesome, but let's take, we'll take maybe 10 minutes, have you guys in breakout rooms and discuss these questions. We'll come back and do a quick share out. So let me build you guys some rooms and we'll get started. So these are split, the README, the lesson README, I just went ahead and separated you guys by your new buddies this week. So let me recreate these because they'll be different from your stand-ups. So we got David and Sophia. Kieran and Michael. Any questions about kind of our little breakout time? And if you don't mind, just give me a thumbs up. I'll keep an eye on the clock, but if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up when you're done. Alejandra and Daniel. And Matt, Audrey, and Deb. Okay, cool. I'll see you guys in about 10 minutes. Let me pause the video.
I think because you can keep it simple, keep your HTML short, and then it's really clear what it's attributing to, and then that will be in just a separate file where your CSS is. And I would think for organizational purposes as well.
So how would that be helpful if I wanted to add an About Me page, like an HTML page for About Me, and an HTML page for Contact, and then an HTML page with like all of my different portfolio projects? Why would a separate style sheet be helpful in that scenario when I have multiple HTML documents?
You might not want to have every single one have the same background or the same styling. And so I think it would be easier for you to then actually take it out and then attribute the styling separately, which you could do all in that CSS sheet.
Yeah, if I wanted to share CSS rules across several different HTML files, it makes sense to put all of those rules in one CSS sheet, a style sheet that I could link in those other HTML files. So for example, if I wanted every H1 tag over all of those HTML pages, you know, About Me and Contact Me and Portfolio page, if I wanted all of those to have the color of red, for example, I could put that one rule for an H1 in that style sheet, and it's one-stop shopping. I only have to create that rule one time. So it's a very dry, we talked about dry a lot, it's a very dry way to do your code. Not to mention the inline styling, and I'm guilty of this as well. Do as I say, not as I do. But we've all been working on an app, and again, you're kind of in the moment, quick and dirty, playing around with it, and you just put a style tag, a style attribute on a tag just in the moment. Like, I'm gonna come back and fix this. I just want to test it out really quickly. And 9 times out of 10, you will not go back and take that out, and you forget about it. And then somewhere down the road, you're trying to restyle your P tags, and then you're like, oh crap, why is it this thing turning blue? I want the color to be blue for these P tags. And sure enough, somewhere down in your code, you put an inline styling rule, and I frequently forget about those. So I do it on occasion if I'm in a hurry, but I try to shy away from it. And Sophia also hit the nail on the head. Of these 3 ways to add rules to your code, the inline styling is going to be the most specific because it's closest to the element. It's actually on the element that you're trying to style. So keep in mind that inline styling is going to overwrite either one of those other 2 methods of adding rules. Very nice. Thank you for that. Who is up next? So describe the 3 components of a CSS rule. Kieran and Michael. What are the 3 components of a CSS rule?
Yeah, so I can take this one. We found there is the selector, which is the thing outside of the curly braces that tells what your CSS is operating on. And then it looks very much like an object, actually, now that we've seen those.
Yeah.
There's color, property, which is like the key in an object, which says which attribute you're trying to work on is the property, and then the value, which goes along with each of the properties. And found this from Matt's reading. That kind of give a good picture of it. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, that's a really great example. Yeah, so the selector would be the element that we're trying to add a rule to, create a rule for. And then, yeah, properties and values. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This does look like kind of your basic JavaScript object. So you could refer to them as keys and values as well. But technically, as far as CSS goes, we refer to it as property and value. Yeah, very nice. Has anyone played around with jQuery before? Okay. So jQuery is the most widely used and most popular JavaScript library on the planet. And one of the reasons for that is that if you guys get really, really savvy at CSS selectors and how CSS rules work, like these examples in Slack, the reason that jQuery is so popular is because jQuery we're going to hop into on Thursday, by the way, but jQuery relies on these selectors. So a lot of times front-end developers that don't know JavaScript very well, but maybe they know CSS and HTML really well, they can incorporate jQuery and like really build some cool stuff because they know CSS selectors so well. So it definitely behooves us to become, you know, relatively savvy at CSS selectors, not only so we can add CSS rules to our stuff, but it's also going to help us when we get to DOM manipulation in jQuery and such. So it's kind of a, that would be the reason why jQuery is so popular and it's frequently used by folks that really don't know how JavaScript works, but they can still build some cool stuff with it, just FYI. Yeah, excellent work. So that's a CSS rule. We have the selector, then the property and the value. Awesome. Very nice. Oh, and then it's right there in the README, the screenshot that I slacked. Just FYI, the proper syntax for what that thing is called is a declaration block. Just, you know, if you really want to get wonky about it. So we could refer to that as it's a block of code because it has the opening and closing curlies, and that would be declaring a CSS rule with a declaration block. Cool, very nice. Let's move on to the next. Well, any questions about those first two? Cool, so describe ID and class and use cases or a use case for each. Christina and Alan.
ID and class are both attributes that you can add to HTML to select in CSS. Class is more broad than ID. Class works for all instances of that class in your HTML, whereas ID can only be used once. As far as use cases goes, you could have like a class called Article 1 if you wanted like one, or you could use an ID called Article 1 if you wanted like the first article to be different. Whereas if you had like, I don't know, encyclopedia articles to be a class, you could style them all the same using class.
Yeah, that's awesome. So classes are reusable. You can use it on multiple things. In ID, you're supposed to only use on one element or one object. Between you and me, if you create an ID and you actually put an ID on two elements, it will actually add that rule to both elements. But keeping in the spirit and the convention of an ID should only be used on one thing. Now, there's kind of a school of thought amongst front-end developers nowadays in that for styling purposes, you want to use classes as much as possible just because they're more flexible and modular. And if you start adding new elements to your HTML, it's nice to have a class kind of locked and loaded that you can add to an element. So to the extent that you can, it's kind of preferred, it's the best practice to try to rely on classes as much as you can. One good use case for IDs, however, is when we get into JavaScript events. So if we have several buttons on our page, and maybe we want a particular JavaScript event to fire on a very specific button, that would be an excellent use case for putting an ID on that button. So we could write a JavaScript function that would only fire on that one thing. So I use IDs very, very frequently, more with JavaScript than CSS. Again, it's just kind of a preference, but I would encourage you guys to try to use classes, you know, as much as possible. It's just more modular. Very nice. Any questions about that, IDs and classes? All right, two more questions, and then we'll get into some CodePen stuff. Explain specificity Alejandra and Danielle. Not Danielle, Daniel.
From my understanding is specifying your HTML with what you want your CSS to do using type selectors or classes and I guess less so IDs. So in your HTML tag, you would say, I want this divs to be a particular class, and then that will be a type of specificity, I believe. So that's what I understood.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to add, like, when I was researching, I found this image. It said it goes in order from most specific value to the least specific value.
Right.
Okay. So from like style attribute to ID, and then like it would end with like class, pseudo class attributes and elements.
Yeah. So, yeah, specificity is one of those things. It's like, I know what it does. It's hard to like describe it sometimes. But those are two really great descriptions. Let me put another image into Slack that may be helpful as well. So specificity, CSS stands for cascading style sheets, meaning that certain rules will cascade down. Certain rules will be inherited by their children and such. You can add selectors together to put rules on multiple selectors, or get really, precise by creating rules, that can get really specific. And that's kind of what specificity is referring to. For example, if we put a style attribute on an element in our HTML, that's going to be super specific, and that's going to take precedence over a separate style sheet, or even if we put some styles within style tags, in the head of our document. So specificity, Christine will attest, I have the worst time explaining that word. I need to come up with a shortcut or something for that word. But it just refers to which rules are going to be applied if multiple rules are going to affect an element, which one takes precedence. The CSS specificity image that I put into Slack is kind of a fun one. There's several of these out there, but hopefully this will kind of demonstrate this concept. And it's something to keep in mind when you're designing your CSS, because you don't want rules to, bash into each other. But for example, the top left-hand corner, that universal selector, that refers to everything on your page. I'll actually, when we get into CodePen, I'll show you. That's a really good tool if you're playing around with layout. I'll show you a way to use that, kind of splat or star selector to really quickly put maybe a border around every element on your page so you can play around with the positioning. But as you can see, that has like a 0-0-0 score. That thing's not going to have priority over anything. It's pretty generic. And then if you go down toward, maybe the second row, that first one on the left, the My Class. So My Class is a little bit more specific, getting a little bit better, and there's like a little 1 in that middle column, right? And then as you go left to right, it gets a little bit more specific. On that third line, so this is a really great way to chain selectors together. So for example, this is the screenshot of that third one on the left. That escalated quickly. Yeah, that's true. I hope Trump is not doing this CSS chart anyway. Yeah, so we could chain together. So in this example, maybe I want to create a rule that will apply to every LI element that also has a My Class class attribute on it. So that's a way to get really specific. Yeah, and then down on that bottom row, and you can see the second most specific thing that you can do, like we've already talked about, is inline styling. So if we look at the bottom right two images there, so we have inline styling on the left, and then the only thing more specific than inline styling is that exclamation point or bang important. So if you put bang important on something, as that name suggests, that's going to overwrite everything. That's going to take precedence over pretty much any rule that you can write. I had one developer friend that I worked with, and he was notorious about when he was just like scaling up some HTML, CSS, he'd put a lot of inline styling, and not only that, but he would put the bang important on stuff just to like get stuff working in a pinch. And then he would talk about, he would pull out some code that he was trying to refactor, months later or something. And he was like, man, it was like trying to untangle Christmas lights because I had these bang importance everywhere. And it was just blowing up my code. Like I couldn't even write CSS rules because all those the nuclear options were taking priority and precedence. Yeah, so that's a really good description of specificity. Just be aware of how the rules can sometimes interact with each other, and you'll be all right. Last but not least, describe 3 ways to combine CSS selectors. Matt, Audrey, and Deb. We'll actually see some examples of that in this specificity screenshot. But do you guys want to talk about 3 ways to combine CSS selectors? Give me some examples.
Your fish kind of stole my show on the imagery. I mean, I don't know how we're gonna kind of come back from that.
Yeah.
But I can show you what we found.
Yeah,
So,
please.
What we have here is that we found just a few, well, a little bit more than a few, but not a lot. Just ways to combine CSS. So originally when we went through it, we kind of first were thinking of like, you know, just listing them together, but then I remember something from the reading and we looked it up together and we came up with these that we saw on W3 school. So descendant selector, child selector, adjacent sibling selector, and general sibling selector. And if I remember correctly, it's supposed to be stuff like if I said H2 is greater than P, then all the paragraphs under H2 that have the same parent, versus if I put like H2 adjacent sibling selector, so there's anything that's under it, even if it doesn't have the same parent. I could be mixing those up, but things around that nature. So pretty much just instead of having to track each one down or find it, you can just say, I'm looking for just these to happen. I want things in this particular bracket and combining different tags to kind of select which I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's a really great description. Sometimes these are referred to as pseudo selectors. We're going to talk a little bit more about these week 3, that week that we come back after the holidays. But pseudo selectors, like Audrey put here in the Slack, it's a really great way of getting very precise with elements, sometimes without having to use an ID. So to the extent that we can, we don't want to put anything into our HTML that we absolutely don't have to. We want to keep our HTML like only for the scaffolding of our site. So if you can get really specific and grab like the last LI in a list, or the last sibling of something, it's better to do that using CSS than using like a JavaScript ID or something, or a CSS ID for that matter. So pseudo selectors are really powerful. It's a little more of kind of an advanced type thing, so it's not like you have to be an expert at that stuff. It's really something that you can look up. But keeping in that theme, that was a really great description, Audrey. Thank you. Here's a couple of other examples. This is from the lesson, just things to be aware of. And some of this is from the specificity image, for example. But this first bullet point, for example, you see that there's a P, comma, and then an ID of left column. So if you have a comma when you create a rule, that means that you can apply this rule to multiple selectors. So you don't have to create a P rule for this and a left column ID rule for this other selector. If you want the same rules applied, you can just chain them together. And so that's a really handy one, using the comma. The next one, for example, a dot important. So grab every A element that also has a class of important on it and apply this rule. There's also, ID left column dot visible. So grab me any ID of left column. Actually, I don't even know if I would necessarily, probably an ID of left column would suffice, right? Because you only have one of those. But in any event, the point is you can chain these things together. There's dot profile dot minimized. So find me all the elements that have a class of profile, and then more specifically, all the class of profile elements that also have a class of minimized. So you could create rules for that. I think you get the idea there. But CSS is really, really flexible and really powerful. And that's kind of the idea. You can get very specific with this stuff. So I have a couple of exercises sprinkled through the lesson. So I thought we may do kind of a code along and code pen just to get a little bit more extra practice. Do you guys have any questions about what we've talked about so far with CSS? Anything that we haven't touched specifically? Okay, cool. So let's do this kind of as just a little bit more practice with this and see if you guys have any questions. Let's go to codepen.io and just create a new pin. I'll share my screen and you guys can kind of follow along. Let's just work through a couple of exercises. I'll also do it. We'll do it together. Guys can do it or watch me do it. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to bring them up, but just as kind of another review. So go ahead and go to codepen.io and I'll share my screen. And if you guys have any questions on getting set up, we can do that. Okay, so I'm going to go to codepen.io. Some of you may already be logged in, or if you haven't signed up for CodePen, you can actually sign in using your GitHub. I think you could even do like Facebook if you wanted to. But you can see right here, this is my GitHub avatar. Let me log out and I'll sign back in just to see how it works. But I think you guys did this in fundamentals, yes? In pre-work? Did you guys use CodePen? Good. So you can go to login right here if you want to save this pin for the future. I'll also Slack out what I'm working on too. But yeah, I usually just log in with GitHub. So I click on that. We're going to go through all this authentication stuff in the Unit 2 and Unit 3. So you'll be able to incorporate if you want. We're going to walk through some basic authentication strategies, but the tools that we use, if you want to dig a little deeper as a bonus, you guys can implement using Twitter or Facebook or GitHub or any other platform that allows it to let your folks log in. Even, I guess, Google lets you do that as well. So if you log in, you should see your avatar here in the top right. And then go ahead and select this new pin. So go ahead and click on that. I have one that I was working on. I'm going to do another one from scratch. But if you want to name it, you know, HTML lesson week 2, day 1 or something, feel free. You can just click on this pencil up here and name it something. And we're only going to be playing around with HTML and CSS right now. So what you can do is, you see how you have these little drop downs for each window? I would suggest, just to give yourself a little bit more real estate, click on this bottom one in the JS window and click Minimize JS Editor. And that'll just shrink it down for you. And you could even stretch this out a little bit just to give yourself enough room. So CodePen is a really handy tool. You guys use it in pre-work, so you're probably pretty savvy on it. I love using these things. And by the way, CodePen is a really great site to check out other people's code. I know that we've done it here. Some of the other instructors and I will put up little snippets of code that you can check out. But if you're ever interested in something mainly HTML, CSS, and JavaScripty, you can spend a lot of time just digging through these pins that people have made public. And there's so much good work on here. If you're looking for like some sort of visual JavaScript D3 type thing, D3 is a library that's very data driven. It's very popular. They use it a lot at the New York Times, for example. A lot of samples of that kind of code, CSS animations and stuff. So sometimes it's easy to go down the rabbit hole and try to learn how folks implement this stuff. Anyway, CodePen is really, really such a great tool, you guys. It's so great, so good. All right, so we have, if you don't mind, go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack when you have your CodePen ready to go. And I'm just going to put some steps, some little exercises into Slack, and we'll work together. Again, it's just to get a little bit of practice with CSS before we hop into the good stuff this afternoon. It's the best, believe me. It's so good. I built the best companies, huge, huge companies. I got to work on my impressions. It'll be the best. Amazing name drop. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's no actual content to the talk. It's just adjectives and stuff. Okay.
Need a lot of hand motions.
Yeah, a lot of this. Yeah.
Tremendous.
Tremendous, yes. Yeah, that's a good word. Or I forget what he says. Terrible, horrible. I forget what he puts a lot. Horrendous. Like the New York Times is horrendous or something. Looks like we have 7 thumbs ups on CodePen. Bigly. Yeah, if you don't mind, just if you haven't given a thumbs up on Christine's 12:52 p.m. thumbs up if you got your CodePen ready. Go ahead and do that, and we'll move forward. Actually, if you already have it working, let me go ahead and put kind of the first steps in here. And if you want to get crazy, go ahead and get creative. These are just as we were walking through the lesson. Today I had you guys actually look this stuff up, but if we were going to walk step by step, we would have done this along the way. But go ahead and work on these, a couple of bullet points, and you can do this in CodePen. So just as a refresher, the way that CodePen works, Audrey mentioned this earlier, and this is really kind of a good thing to keep in mind. With CodePen and these interactive, these IDEs, IDE stands for Interactive Development Environment, you don't need to put doc type in here. And you also don't need to put like head or body. And in fact, I think it'll bark at you if you do that at some point. Well, maybe it's not going to bark at me, but I think you can turn on a linter if you want. But the point is, it already assumes that you want a head and a body and stuff. So this HTML window is just the body. It's just considered the body. Now, if you did want to add some sort of information to the head section, that would typically be if you want to import a separate library, like maybe if you did want to use jQuery or Google Fonts or Bootstrap. The way that CodePen lets you do that, just FYI, is you can go up here to Settings, and then you could go to these different areas right here, like HTML. Here's stuff for the head. So you could put it in manually if you wanted, like if there's some Google Analytics or something that they don't offer, you could put it here. You wouldn't necessarily see it, but you could put it here and it would pull it in for you. But you could also, yeah, this quick add section is really cool. So instead of like typing out some information for your head, if I wanted to pull in like the Bootstrap CSS library, or animate.css is a really fun one. You guys, maybe we'll talk about that at some point. You can just add it right here and it'll be pulled in automatically. So just FYI, we're not going to play with that right now, but CodePen is such a great tool. Okay, in any event, so go ahead and work on those bullet points. If anyone needs help, I can get you guys up and running, and we'll take a few minutes. Give me a thumbs up when you finish those 7, 8 bullet points, and then I'm just going to recreate them here myself. A couple of quick tips, and then I'll stop talking. CodePen, just like Adam, you can hit tab and it will auto-complete tags and such for you. So for example, if I wanted to create a P tag, all I need to do is type the letter P, and I can hit tab, make this a little larger, and it will go ahead and kind of auto-complete that element, which is super, super nice. Another really handy feature of CodePen is if you want some lorem ipsum. Do we all know what lorem ipsum is? Like that kind of like placeholder text. You can type in lorem, L-O-R-E-M, and hit tab, and it'll dump in some very basic lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is, I think it's maybe Greek, but they used to use it as kind of a spacing or placeholder text to kind of get the dimensions or how big sections would look. I'm probably butchering that explanation, but yeah, there's several of them. Yeah, Christina put Hipsum in there. There's also like a Wes Anderson version. There's Bacon Ipsum, so it's all like bacon terms and stuff. There's a lot of these fun little things. But if you just want some like dummy text, it's a really great handy feature. So yeah, so
can you show me how you do it again? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, can you guys see my screen okay? Is this big enough? Yeah, so for example, if I wanted just some placeholder lorem ipsum, you can type L-O-R-E-M, and I'll put this into Slack, and then just hit tab, and it'll just give you some default lorem ipsum text. Actually, I think this is like from a book. I think this is like the first 2 sentences from some famous manuscript or something. I need to look that up. But yeah, you can type in lorem. Christina may be doing this as well, but you can type in lorem plus tab. And that'll work in Atom as well. But any elements, pretty much any element that you want to create, like if I wanted a span tag, I can just type in the word span and hit tab, and it'll auto create it for me. Nice little shortcut. You just need to make sure, just type in the word. Don't type in that opening less than symbol. If you do that, I don't think it will auto-complete for you. Yeah, then it's just a little wonky. But yeah, you can just type in the word and do that, or for a div or something. Yeah. Cool. So give me a thumbs up in Slack when you get those bullet points done. I'm going to build one myself. So if you guys have any questions or anything, this doesn't have to be super pretty or anything. It's just some exercise time. So let me scoot this over here. So I can look at Slack and see what we're asking here. All right, cool. Create an HTML page with a p tag and some placeholder text. So you guys actually don't need the HTML part. You can just start with the p tag. So I would hit P and then the letter P and then tab, so it'll auto do it. And then some placeholder text. So you can just type in lorem and hit tab. Pretty easy. Changes text color to a hex value. Actually, I'll just hold off for a minute and let you guys work. But be sure to give me a thumbs up when you're done. Actually, I'll stop my screen share for the moment. And if you guys are, as you're working through this, a really good piece of documentation for CSS properties and such. I'll put it into Slack. Or if you just want to Google the Mozilla Developer Network, the MDN, I'm sure you guys are pretty savvy at that. That's really good CSS documentation. However, if I'm being completely honest, half the time I go to like W3 schools for CSS because I feel like it's a little bit, just a little more plain spoken, or it's a little clearer. It's not quite as wonky, and they have really good examples. So a lot of times I just use W3 schools if I'm in a pinch. It seems to be a little more accessible. But the Mozilla Developer Network tools, documentation is obviously like super important, particularly for JavaScript. But I really like W3 schools for sure. All right, we got 1 thumbs up. That's cool. Yeah, let's get 2 or 3 more thumbs up, and then maybe have one of you guys share your screen and quickly walk us through the properties that you picked out. and then we'll move forward. All right. Okay, got a couple of thumbs up. That's cool. So keep working if you want. But how about Alan? Would you want to share your screen and walk us through kind of the properties you used? There may be several different ways, you know, to get this stuff working. So I'm just curious to see what you guys use.
Be prepared. It's beautiful.
All right. Awesome. CSS really lets you show your artistic side. Very fun. All right.
Okay, so I just have my p tags here and my nonsense.
Yeah.
And then selected my p tag, and then I made it the text color this beautiful pink with this hex, and then the background I just made blue. Selected font size and made 20 pixels. Made the font family sans serif. Font weight is strong to make it bold, and then aligned the text center.
Cool. So your sans serif.
Is that wrong?
Did that actually take?
Yeah, it works.
I still see. Am I still seeing a little bit of serif though on your text? So do you guys know what serif? I'm probably butchering that. Do you guys know what that is or what that means?
It's basically the feet on it, right?
Yeah, it's the little like wispy at the ends of some of the letters, like on your Q and your D's, maybe your L's. It's kind of hard to see on that screen. But for example, because I'm just checking the way you spelled font family, I wonder if you take it out of quotes. Oh no, it says to do quotes. Maybe do lowercase sans dash serif in quotes. We'll see if that will take.
Hyphen missing.
Yeah, and put the hyphen. I think that may work.
I thought you only need the quotes if there's a space.
So no quotes?
The documentation says to use quotes. The other thing you could do, just for example, type in Arial. So it needs to be a font that does have like a sans serif option, but Arial is just like a quick and dirty, just for example's sake. So see how Arial, it's very clean and there aren't any kind of wispy ends to some of the letters. So that's really the difference between sans serif. I need to look up the proper way to pronounce that. Oh yeah, Christine put a great screenshot in there. Oh, and Mike put, yeah, so Alan, maybe if you don't put it in quotes, maybe that's the way to go. But
that looks right.
Yeah, that looks fine. Anyway, you get the idea. That's cool. Text align center, that's awesome. Font weight strong, very nice. Alan, while you're sharing your screen, another, so there's several different ways to size something. So for font size, Alan used PX. There's also EM. Does someone know what EMs are?
Isn't it something to do with the size of the width of an M?
Yeah, it goes back from like the old like typesetting days, but 1 unit of EM is 16 PX by default. The great thing about EM is that it's more of a proportional way to set up your code, because the EM by default is 16 PX. However, if you put a font size property on your body tag, whatever font size that is, your EMs will be proportional throughout your code. So for example, Alan, on your font size, put a 2 EM there. And it should be a little larger. So that would equate to like 32 PX. But what Alan could do is very, very flexible. Let's say that he used EM throughout his code. If he wanted to make everything like slightly bigger, the only thing he would have to do is go to his body tag and create a font size rule on, use the font size property on his body tag, and he could make it 18 PX or something. And then it would flow down all the EMs, and then this P tag would actually be 36 PX underneath the hood instead of 32. But EMs, it's a really very cool, very modern way to do your code, and it's very flexible and proportional. And so you would only need to, if you wanted to make everything slightly bigger, slightly smaller, the only place you would need to change your code is one place on your body tag, just by setting the font size. So just something to be aware of. So 2 EM equals 200%. Yeah, absolutely right. You can also do decimal. You can do floats on EMs. So you could do like 1.5 EM, and that would be 16 plus 8, 24 PX underneath the hood. But yeah, you could do 2.1 EMs or what have you. There's also something, I think Colin may touch on it tomorrow, so I'll let him take care of it. Something called VM and VH. Have you guys, excuse me, VH and VW, excuse me. What are these units of measurement? Have you guys heard of these? These are particularly popular now that mobile and portable devices are kind of like taking over the planet and such. Anyone? VH and VM? Excuse me, VW?
Height and width are the first thing that come to mind.
Yeah, so this stands for viewport height and viewport width. So it's very popular because it's 1 to 100. But viewport height and viewport width, so it's based on the viewport of whatever device. So whether it's a mobile device, if you have it portrait or landscape, an iPad, an Android, your laptop, an external monitor, but it's based on 0 to 100 or 1 to 100. I guess if it was 0, you wouldn't be able to see it. But yeah, so instead of doing a percentage, or I want this to be like 200 PX, if you're trying to design mobile first, and that's kind of a big paradigm in design, is this mobile first idea. The idea is that it's easier to design for something really small, for something like a mobile device, and then build outward, versus designing your site for like a huge, desktop screen and then making it smaller and responsive for smaller devices. It's easier to go mobile first and start small and make it larger. So VH and VW are part of that. And so if I make something, if I want an image like 50% of the viewport width, then it's going to be 50% on my mobile, it's going to be 50% on my desktop, 50% on my iPad. So it's a way to maintain that consistency across devices. It's a really clever way to do your code. That's another unit of measurement in conjunction with EM that's really popular nowadays. So just FYI, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about responsive design. Cool, Alan, that's excellent work. Thanks for sharing. Let's put in the next little challenge here. And so these challenges are just to try to kind of reflect what we've talked about in the past hour or so. So this is, just playing around with classes and IDs, just to make sure we're solid on And I'm going to add that to mine as well. Let me Slack out my code pin. If anyone's interested in checking out mine, let me Slack out the link to it. If you want something for reference. So if you go down to the very bottom, no, it's not share. Just let me send you the URL. I think you can just access it via the URL. I don't think you can edit it. You'd probably need to fork it if you wanted to play around with this. There's that fork convention, or version control term. But if you're interested, because I'm kind of building this myself too, you could go to that pin and check out the code if you want. Mine's not as slick as Alan's, that's for sure. Yeah, and give me a thumbs up in Slack when you create some beautiful code pen magic with that one. Another thing to keep in mind while you guys are working, and again, it's really just how you want to set it up, and whatever dev shop or outfit that you go to work at, they'll probably have their own style sheet, style convention. But as far as organization of your CSS rules, it's kind of up to you. Some folks like to organize their rules alphabetically. Some folks like to organize their rules alphabetically, starting with all the tags, and then have all the classes together alphabetically, then maybe have all the IDs alphabetically. Some folks will organize their CSS rules selectors by the section or by the page. So maybe these are all my selectors for my About Me page. Although if you're sharing them, it's kind of a moot point. But maybe if you have a single page app, like a really long app that you can scroll down that single page, and maybe you have several sections within that one page, maybe you want to organize your rules according to the section, just to help you organize it. It's really up to you. As long as it's very readable and there's some sense of organization to it, is probably fine. So just FYI, I'm sure you guys will settle on your own how you want to set it up. All right, Matthew. So let's wait on one or two more folks, and then we'll have Matthew demo his code pen, classes and IDs. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, Matthew, while folks are working, would you mind sharing your screen? We'll check out your work. And yeah, if you want to come off mic when you're ready. Come on, Mike, rather.
There we go. Yeah, so I gave the first paragraph an ID of first, and the second two paragraphs a class of second. And that's how I was able, in my CSS, to give them each of their colors, regardless of what the other one had.
Yeah, that looks great. So, sorry, where's your ID? It's probably up in the HTML somewhere.
Yeah, so it's here on the first paragraph.
Nice. Cool. One convention with HTML and CSS is that it's generally a hyphen case. And it's all lowercase with hyphen when you do your naming and such. Just something, to keep in mind. So you could probably do, lowercase first, lowercase second, and then the same in your CSS. I really wish that like JavaScript, Ruby, all these languages, I wish they would just like settle on one naming convention. But yeah, so if you just want to keep it proper. We were talking about jQuery earlier and how if you know CSS rules really well, CSS selectors really well, you can do a lot with jQuery. And sometimes it's interesting because JavaScript is camel case, but CSS and HTML, the convention is kind of a hyphen case. So even if something's hyphenated in HTML, when you write the JavaScript for it, most of the time it's going to need to be camel case. So sometimes, depending on what library you're using, sometimes you need to do that conversion manually. So you guys will get pretty savvy at that, but it's just like, let's just agree on one convention. Yeah, that was great, man. Very nice. Cool. So let's move on to the next section, and I want to get you guys out of here. Let's do this one section, and then I'll let you guys go for lunch. I know some of you have outcomes. So let me put this next section in there. So this is to demonstrate a little bit about how kind of parent tags, how children tags will inherit from their parent tags that contain them. So this is to illustrate that. And I'll go ahead and put this last, I think we just had like 2 more to-do sections. I'll go ahead and put those into Slack, even if you don't get to them, if you want to play around with them over lunch or something, feel free. And then give me a thumbs up in Slack when you get that first section done, and then we'll head off to lunch. And then when we come back this afternoon, it should be pretty fun. So we'll talk about the dev tools in the console, the dev tools in your browser, the console, inspecting the elements and such, which you guys will be living in the dev tools as developers. I mean, we pretty much live in the dev tools. And then we'll talk about DOM manipulation. And I know that that was also in your pre-work, your fundamentals. So I'm hoping we'll take that a little bit further. But your project over the holidays will involve some DOM manipulation. So it's I really like that stuff. I think it's fun. Oh, Ipsen Heisenberg. That's hilarious. Did you guys see Walter White on Saturday Night Live Saturday? That's pretty funny. I think it was like the cold open, like the first, before they do the credits. He was in that. It's pretty cool. If you want to check that out. All right. Well, let's do this, guys. It's like 1:24. I want to give you outcomes folks a little bit of time to get together, get lunch or what you need to do. So let's put a pin in that. These exercises, again, if you're comfortable with CSS and HTML, don't sweat these exercises. It was mainly just to get a little bit more practice before we move forward. If you guys have any questions about those exercises, just ping me. Otherwise, let's go ahead and break for lunch. And we'll see you guys back here at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Any questions before we head out? Okay. Have a great lunch. We'll see you at 2:30. I'll hang out for a minute or two if you guys have any questions.
For those of you with Monday outcomes today, just keep an eye out on the outcomes Slack channel. Eric will be dropping the link where you guys are meeting. And is attendance mandatory? Yes, it is.
Did someone ask if attendance was optional?